Hi, I'm Rebecca from conquerbooks.com, and I have been reading Wanders for a very long time. I've been doing a 6-month series, so every single month that this book takes place, I've been reading it in real time. We're finally at the end of the book, all the way at the end in November. If you have not watched the series yet, there's 2 hours of content on the Conquer Books channel if you want to dive deep into Chuck Wendig's Wanders. If this is the first time you're hearing about this book and you want a spoiler-free review, check the links down below. I'll link to the video that I did with Nicole last year when it came out. So I am indeed reading Wanders because it's a pandemic book and we're in a pandemic, and isn't it just so much fun thinking about pandemics? Well, it's been a long time. Similarly to how long I've been reading this book, we've been in the pandemic for a long time. But let's get to the plot. So the general recap of Wanders is there is a group of individuals that leave their houses one morning and they begin walking across the United States. You can't communicate with them, you can't stop them. They are just in stasis, walking, traveling across the United States. And there is a lot of concern over this disease spreading. And what we find out is that it's actually something that is controlled by nanotechnology, which is controlled by an artificial intelligence called Black Swan. Black Swan is actually trying to save humanity. These are the chosen individuals that Black Swan is going to save because there's a virus called White Mask, and this virus travels from bats to humans, and it is basically a fungus that begins in your sinuses and then roots up into your brain. And there's a very long incubation period before you start being symptomatic, but you're contagious. And so this is really sweeping across the planet very quickly. And Black Swan is just trying to help the little old humans out. So if you want recaps for the other months, I'll link those down below as well. This is just focusing on November at the end. There's also a little bit of an epilogue or a sense of what happens after the plot has all been wrapped up. We already know that one of the main point of view characters, Hanna, is very suspicious of Black Swan. Everybody else is pretty much like, oh, Black Swan, you're saving us, you're amazing. But Shanna is inside Black Swan's simulation because the nanotechnology overtook Shanna's body in a previous month. And she is just not having it. She does not trust Black Swan. She thinks that it is hiding something. And so she's struggling with these feelings, and her sister Nessie is very on board with, you know, Black Swan did what it had to do. The world is indeed ending, and the flock, which started on the East Coast, went all the way to the West Coast, and then finally down and back, ends in Colorado. And if you've read The Stand by Stephen King, which is another really great pandemic book, you'll notice that similarities between the settings here. We saw Las Vegas last month, and then we saw Colorado this month, which is exactly where Stephen King directs his characters. The good characters go to Colorado, the bad characters, of course, go to Las Vegas. So we can make our own assumptions about whether or not the flock is good or not. They go to Colorado, and after months and months of walking, they find a hotel room, they find a house, they find somewhere, and the sleepwalkers, they just lie down. And this is where they are going to wait out the end of the world. Eventually, Black Swan will awaken them so that they can repopulate the world and continue human life on planet Earth. We still have quite a few of our other point of view characters, ones that aren't being controlled by Black Swan. For instance, Benji, who formerly worked for the CDC. Like every other institution on the planet, the CDC is now gone, as well as the US government, and, you know, basically even all the libraries. That's how bad it is. So Benji decides that his role is to try and assemble supplies, assemble books that they can use about homesteading and, you know, surviving on their own in the wilderness without modern technology and the internet and electricity. And he thinks that that is how he can contribute to this next chapter of human life on planet Earth. Then we get a visit from Pastor Matthew, who shows up and tells Benji and the rest of the crew that Ozark, the white supremacist, he and his gang are headed their way because they just cannot stand, they cannot tolerate anything that's different, anything that they don't trust. They want to be the controllers of this new world, and they have this vision that they are just going to take everybody else out with tanks. And I really enjoyed reading that plot line because it was so well done and complicated. All of the characters there had their own reasons for why they were roped into this gang. So anyways, Pastor Matthew comes, and this is his redemption moment. He was one of the individuals that was inciting this alt-right movement and putting the flock and the shepherds at risk. And so he sees it as his job to alert them to what is happening. But there's not much they can do. They have dozens and dozens of vehicles driving their way across the country, and we get some really interesting snippets about what is happening in the US now at the end of the world. Some people are in late stages with white mask, and they're delirious, and they're hallucinating all kinds of things, and if they have weapons in their house, they think they're being attacked. Some people are hunkering down and waiting it out. I've mentioned these before, but at the beginning of each chapter we get these little snippets of like a tweet, or this one is a billboard in Las Vegas that says, "We're all gonna die, might as well gamble." So just these little things to help with the world building here, which is really interesting. Ozark's gang does indeed reach the town that they're in Colorado, and the humans that are left have tried to devise a plan where they can protect these sleepwalkers. But Shanna, who's in Black Swan simulation, her physical body is laying in a hotel room, but her mind is in this virtual reality that Black Swan has prepared to keep them busy while they're in this stasis. And she has been trying to get the other individuals in the virtual reality setting to, I guess, turn against Black Swan or convince them that Black Swan is hiding something. But now this is really her moment to rise up and make a difference. She has no choice but to team up with Black Swan. And she absolutely does not want to, but she also wants to save her friends and her sister. So she goes into this room in this like virtual world, which is like Black Swan's like inner systems. Like nobody else has been in this space before, and it's just black. And she comes up with the idea that Black Swan can use the eyesight of the flock members to kind of see, what is going on, and maybe they can try and figure out how to communicate with Benji and the rest of the team. But the real saver of the day is Arv. So Shanna is pregnant, Arv is the father, and they had this wonderful romance brewing, just as the world was ending. And he is in the very last stages of White Mask. He's not gonna make it much longer. And Black Swan fills him with nanobots, and uses him to get close to Ozark's gang. And essentially the nanobots infiltrate the other bodies, and they explode, they burst. Bone goes everywhere, and blood, and it's very grisly, but it does the job. Stover, of course, runs away. He leaves his little gang behind, goes off into the woods, and Pastor Matthew is like chasing him. And we get the return of Pete Corley, who had traveled back to the East Coast to try and find some redemption with his family. Pete Corley returns in the RV, and he hits Stover, and then Matthew shoots him, which brings all three of those individuals, like everybody's, plot lines, they all kind of converge in this ending, who have had interactions with Ozark. And so it's a very satisfying way to end it and give some of the characters, maybe you could imagine the next steps for them going forward. Like, what are they going to do now that this, evil doer, is gone? So now it's time for the flock to rest. And after November, we skip 5 years forward. And I was not going to skip 5 years forward. I don't know what I'm doing in 2025, but it's not talking about the last 10 pages of this book, I think. I'll probably still be recommending the book at that point. But so they wake up 5 years later. Shanna wakes up and she realizes that she is the very last of the sleepwalkers to wake up. Not only was she absent from the virtual reality that Black Swan had kind of kept everybody in, she also did not wake up when everybody else did. And so they didn't really know what was going to happen with Shanna. And during that time, most of humanity dies. We do find out that the death rate for White Mask isn't quite 100% like we thought it was for, most of the book. Similar to, again, The Stand, right there, there's about like 1% survival rate, maybe a little bit less. And Benji and Marcy and Pete Corley are some of the individuals that survive. And Shanna is really the one who opened the book, and she's the one who closes the book up for us. She wakes and she realizes that she is indeed different than the other members of the flock. Black Swan is a part of her, and Black Swan tells her that she and her child are going to be the hosts for the Black Swan swarm. And she is furious, but what can she do about it? We also learn that really within like the last 2 pages, we learn that while Shanna was in this black room in Black Swan's inner circle, inner mind, we learned that Black Swan was the instigator of White Mask. So for most of the book, we know that Black Swan is controlling the sleepwalkers to save them, but now we find out that Black Swan is the one who released the White Mask disease into the world. And that is because Black Swan has this idea that it was unclear if it was, just logical reasoning, or if Black Swan really indeed did send a message from the future. But Black Swan says that humans on their, rampage and pillaging of the world are going to cause so much global warming that there's no life in the future. Not even just humans are wiped out. There's no animals, there's no insects, the oceans die. And this was the only way that Black Swan foresaw the humans surviving, but also the world as a whole. So, man, when I first read this, so I first read this last year and then I read it again this year because of the pandemic theme, I felt betrayed by Black Swan because it seemed like such a neutral, logical computer, system, artificial intelligence that was, trying to help humans. And you have this moment of realization that Black Swan is still trying to help humans. This was the only, way to resolve the problems that humans were creating, Black Swan felt. But you also kind of feel betrayed. But, we all should take better care of the planet so that we don't have a Black Swan come in 2025 and, put us in line. When I first started these videos, it was in June when the book opens up, and now we're finished in November. And in June, Wisconsin, the state that I live in, was getting about 500 COVID-19 new cases a day. And when I recorded last month in October, the number was about 3,000. And now that we're in November of 2020, Wisconsin's getting an average of 6,000 cases a day. So it really is disappointing that, this pandemic is ending. I mean, not in a great way. We don't want to have an ending like this one. But this pandemic is ending after 6 months, and we are still living this reality. Depending on where you live in the world, there's many, many wonderful areas of the world that are handling their public health crisis very well. But where, there's a lot of similarities between COVID and White Mask, both that it's highly contagious and that you're contagious before you start showing symptoms, but also a lot of the ignorance or slow progression to the reality of the situation, both in reality and in fiction, has been interesting to watch too. In the US, it was really about March that, we had, government shutdowns and people began wearing masks and schools started to close. And now that I'm in November in Wisconsin, I really don't know when the end of our pandemic is. It could be a neat year. Maybe, vaccines will be available to people in Wisconsin in March as well. But you know, it's still going to be a significant time. It is exciting that there is conversation about potential vaccines that can be really quite effective and really protect people. But you know, school is not in session here in Wisconsin. Well, okay. The public school system in my community is not in session. There's a lot of like private schools that are in session, and some that aren't even encouraging their students to wear masks. And I guess I can't speak for the entire state of Wisconsin. Who knows what's going on up north? But most people are kind of in their rut. Either they are masking up and staying home, or they've decided to not change their habits at all during this time. So it's going to be interesting watching this video in a few months, and you know, for me, I'll be able to look back and just think about Rebecca in November of 2020. You know, hi Rebecca of February 2021. See you in a while. This is the last video in the series. Like I said, there's about 2 hours of content about the Wanderers. So if you've recently finished reading this, you know, you can do a deep dive with me. Let's discuss. Before I go, though, one of the things I wanted to mention that I felt I learned a lot from this book about writing was Chuck Wendig really did a great job of having multiple layers in his plot twists, you know, especially this big ending with Black Swan not really being entirely truthful. Like, it kind of kept us on our toes. There was this moving target. Could you trust Black Swan or not? And which disease was doing what, you know, what was the primary concern? It's also a really great example of multiple well-developed point of view characters. And he writes so wonderfully about issues that he cares about, you know, anti-racism and public health and equality and, you know, fake news. There's just a lot of really timely themes in here. And so it was a joy reading this book again, even though I typically don't reread a book just a year after reading it. So if you've been watching, thank you for sticking with me for 6 months. I hope this pandemic ends for us as well soon. Goodbye.